Hey everyone, Emily Carter here. And what I'm about to show you isn't just another economic story. This is about a financial time bomb that's already ticking, and when it goes off, it's going to devastate millions of American families. Right now, at this very moment, Americans are carrying over $1.2 trillion in credit card debt. That's trillion with a T. And here's what should terrify you. Interest rates on those cards have hit levels we haven't seen in decades. We're talking 25, 27, even 30% APR on cards that millions of people depend on just to survive month to month. This isn't about people living beyond their means or buying luxury items they can't afford. This is about working families using credit cards to pay for groceries, medical bills, car repairs, and rent because their paychecks don't stretch far enough anymore. And the system that was supposed to help people build credit and manage cash flow has turned into a predatory debt trap that's destroying the American middle class from the inside out. I've been covering economic crises and financial trends for years, and I have to tell you, this credit card debt situation is one of the most dangerous patterns I've ever tracked. Delinquency rates are spiking. More Americans are missing payments than at any time since the Great Recession. Credit scores are plummeting. Families are losing access to credit right when they need it most. And the ripple effects are just beginning. Because when consumer spending collapses under the weight of unsustainable debt, the entire economy goes with it. Consumer spending drives 70% of GDP. When that engine stalls, we're looking at recession. Possibly worse. By the end of this video, you're going to understand exactly how we got here, why the numbers are so much worse than anyone's admitting, and what happens when this debt bomb finally detonates. So let's dive in because time is running out. Picture this. You're a typical American household. You make a decent income, maybe $60,000 to $75,000 a year. You work hard. You try to save. But between rent or mortgage, car payments, insurance, groceries that seem to cost more every single week, student loans, childcare, and everything else, there's nothing left at the end of the month. So when the car breaks down and you need $1,200 for repairs, or when your kid needs braces, or when medical bills hit after an emergency room visit, what do? You put it on the credit card. You tell yourself you'll pay it off when things get better, when you get that raise, when you catch up. But things don't get better. They get worse. That's the reality for tens of millions of Americans right now. And the numbers are absolutely staggering. According to the Federal Reserve, total credit card debt in the United States has surged past $1.2 trillion. To put that in perspective, that's more than the entire GDP of most countries. It's more than the combined economies of Sweden and Norway. And it's growing faster than at any point in the past 2 decades. But here's where it gets really disturbing. The average American household now carries over $7,000 in credit card debt. That might not sound catastrophic until you factor in the interest rates. Right now, the average credit card APR in America is hovering around 25%. Some cards are charging 27, 28, even 30%. Think about what that means. If you're carrying $7,000 in debt at 25% interest and only making minimum payments, you'll pay over $15,000 total before that debt is gone. More than double what you borrowed. And that assumes you never add another charge to the card. Most people can't do that. They're still using those cards every month because they have to. So the balance never goes down. It just grows. And the interest compounds. Month after month. Year after year. People are trapped in a cycle they literally cannot escape without either defaulting or getting a financial miracle. Now let me show you how we ended up in this nightmare. Because this didn't happen overnight. This is the result of decades of policy decisions, corporate greed, and a financial system that was deliberately structured to extract maximum profit from working people. Go back to the early 2000s. Credit card companies went on an absolute rampage. They flooded the market with offers. Pre-approved cards sent to anyone with a pulse. They made it incredibly easy to get credit because they understood the business model perfectly. Get people hooked on easy credit. Let them build up balances. Then lock them into high interest rates that guarantee massive profits even if some percentage of borrowers default. It was predatory lending disguised as financial convenience. The 2008 financial crisis temporarily slowed this down. People got scared. They paid down debt. Credit card companies tightened standards. But after the crisis passed, the cycle started all over again. Only this time, it was turbocharged by something new. Stagnant wages combined with rising costs for everything. Over the past 2 decades, the cost of housing, healthcare, education, and basic necessities has exploded. Meanwhile, real wages for most Americans have barely budged. When you adjust for inflation, most workers are making roughly the same or less than they were making 20 years ago. So how do people bridge that gap between what they earn and what things cost? Credit cards. It's not a choice. It's survival. And the credit card companies know this. They're not stupid. They understand that millions of Americans aren't using cards for luxury purchases. They're using them to survive. And that makes them a captive customer base. People who can't pay off their balances. People who will be paying interest for years. Decades even. That's the business model. And it's working brilliantly for the banks while destroying families. But here's what changed everything and set us on the path to this current crisis. The Federal Reserve's interest rate hikes. Starting in 2022, the Fed began aggressively raising interest rates to fight inflation. They've pushed rates higher faster than almost any time in modern history. And while the stated goal was to cool down the economy and bring inflation under control, there was a side effect that nobody wanted to talk about publicly. Credit card interest rates went through the roof. C. Credit card rates are tied to the prime rate, which moves with Federal Reserve policy. When the Fed raises rates, credit card companies raise their rates too. Except here's the thing. When the Fed lowers rates, credit card companies don't lower their rates nearly as much or as quickly. It's a one-way ratchet. Rates go up fast. They come down slow if at all. So over the past 2 years, millions of Americans who are already struggling with credit card debt suddenly saw their interest rates spike from 18 or 20% to 25 or 27%. Their monthly interest charges exploded. More of their payment goes to interest. Less goes to principal. The debt becomes even harder to escape. And this is happening at the exact same time that inflation is making everything more expensive. So people are earning the same wages, paying more for groceries and gas and rent, and now paying higher interest on the debt they took on just to survive the previous crisis. It's a perfect financial storm. And it's crushing people. Let me show you what this looks like in real numbers, because this is where theory becomes devastating reality. Let's say you're carrying $10,000 in credit card debt at 27% APR. That's not unusual right now. If you make the minimum payment, which is typically around 2 to 3% of the balance, you're looking at about $250 per month initially. Sounds manageable maybe, but here's the problem. At 27% interest, you're being charged $225 in interest that first month. So out of your $250 payment, only $25 goes toward actually reducing what you owe. The rest is pure profit for the credit card company. At that rate, it would take you over 30 years to pay off that $10,000 debt. And you'd pay more than $30,000 in total, 3 times what you borrowed. And that's assuming you never miss a payment and never add to the balance. In reality, most people can't keep that up. They miss a payment. The card company hits them with a late fee and a penalty APR that might be 30% or higher. Now the hole gets even deeper. Or they have another emergency and have to put more on the card. The balance grows instead of shrinking. And the cycle becomes completely unbreakable without drastic intervention. Now multiply that by millions of households. You're looking at a generation of Americans who will never be debt-free, who will spend their entire working lives paying interest to banks, who will never build wealth or savings or financial security because every spare dollar goes to servicing debt. This isn't just an individual tragedy. This is a systemic economic catastrophe. But it gets worse, because we're now seeing the early warning signs that this debt load has become unsustainable. And those signs are showing up in delinquency rates. Credit card delinquencies are spiking at an alarming rate. According to recent Federal Reserve data, the percentage of credit card debt that's 90 days or more past due has surged to levels we haven't seen since 2010 and 2011, right after the Great Recession. We're talking about serious delinquency, not just people who missed one payment. People who are 3 months or more behind and in real financial trouble. Banks are starting to report higher charge-off rates. That's when they've given up on collecting the debt and write it off as a loss. When charge-offs increase, it means people aren't just struggling. They're defaulting completely. They've stopped paying because they literally cannot pay. Their financial situations have deteriorated to the point where making credit card payments is impossible. And here's why this matters beyond the individual hardship. When delinquencies and defaults rise, credit card companies respond by tightening credit. They lower credit limits. They close accounts. They deny new applications. This cuts off access to credit for millions of people who were using it as a financial lifeline. Suddenly, people who were barely hanging on lose that last cushion. They can't put groceries on a card anymore. They can't cover an unexpected expense. They're pushed into complete financial crisis. And this creates a vicious cycle. As more people lose access to credit, consumer spending drops. Businesses see declining sales. They cut costs by laying off workers or reducing hours. Now more people are struggling financially. More people fall behind on their credit cards. Delinquencies rise further. Credit tightens more. The cycle accelerates. This is exactly the pattern we saw in the lead-up to the 2008 financial crisis. Credit stress in the household sector spreading to the broader economy. We're watching it happen again in real time. Now let's talk about the psychological and social devastation this is causing. Because this isn't just about numbers on a spreadsheet. This is about real people whose lives are being destroyed by debt. The stress of carrying massive credit card debt with no clear path to paying it off is crushing. Financial stress is one of the leading causes of anxiety, depression, insomnia, and even physical health problems. People lose sleep worrying about how they're going to make the minimum payment. They avoid answering their phones because it might be a debt collector. They feel shame and embarrassment about their situation even though it's often not their fault. Relationships suffer. Financial stress is one of the top causes of divorce in America. Couples fight about money. They blame each other. The pressure tears families apart. Parents work multiple jobs trying to keep up with debt payments, which means less time with their kids. The American dream of building a better life for the next generation feels impossible when you're drowning in 27% interest on credit card debt you took on just to pay for groceries and medical bills. And there's a generational component to this that's particularly disturbing. Young adults are entering the workforce with massive student loan debt. They can't afford housing. They're earning wages that haven't kept pace with inflation. So they turn to credit cards to bridge the gap. They're starting their financial lives already trapped in debt. Many will never own homes, never build significant savings, never achieve the financial stability their parents' generation took for granted. The credit card debt crisis is actively preventing an entire generation from building wealth and participating fully in the economy. This has long-term consequences that go far beyond individual hardship. But while families suffer, someone is making a fortune off this misery. The credit card industry is posting record profits. We're talking tens of billions of dollars annually in profit from interest and fees. The top credit card issuers in America, the big banks that dominate this market, are making more money than ever. Because high interest rates combined with large outstanding balances equals massive revenue. And the people paying those bills are working families who have no other choice. This is wealth extraction on an industrial scale. Money flowing from working people to financial institutions. And it's completely legal, completely normalized. We've accepted a system where it's okay for banks to charge 27% interest on essential survival spending while paying almost nothing on savings accounts. Think about that asymmetry. You put money in a savings account at a bank, they might pay you 0.5% interest. Maybe 1% if you're lucky. But they charge you 25 to 30% on credit card debt. That spread is pure profit. And it's sustained by a system that keeps working people dependent on credit because wages don't cover basic living expenses. This isn't free market capitalism. This is a rigged game. And the people who rigged it are winning while everyone else loses. Now let me show you what happens next. Because we're approaching a critical inflection point. And there are 3 possible scenarios for how this plays out over the next 12 to 24 months. Scenario 1, the soft landing that probably won't happen. In this optimistic scenario, inflation continues to moderate. The Federal Reserve starts cutting interest rates. Credit card companies respond by lowering their rates too, though not as much. Some of the pressure comes off households. Delinquency rates stabilize. People start slowly paying down debt. Consumer spending remains steady enough to avoid recession. The economy muddles through. The debt doesn't disappear, but it stops getting worse. The crisis becomes chronic rather than acute. People adjust to a new normal of permanent indebtedness. It's not good, but it's survivable. This is the best-case scenario. And honestly, it's not very likely given current trends. Scenario 2, the consumer spending collapse. This is the more realistic scenario and the one I'm most concerned about. Credit card debt keeps growing. Delinquencies keep rising. More people hit their breaking point and either default or drastically cut spending to try to survive. Consumer spending, which drives 70% of the economy, drops significantly. Retailers see declining sales. They cut inventory orders. Manufacturers reduce production. Layoffs begin. As unemployment rises, even more people fall behind on credit card payments. The delinquency spiral accelerates. Banks tighten credit further. This triggers a recession. Not a mild one. A real contraction driven by the collapse of consumer demand. In this scenario, we see mass defaults. Credit scores plummet for millions of Americans. Access to credit disappears for large segments of the population. Housing markets suffer because people can't qualify for mortgages. Auto sales collapse. Businesses that depend on consumer spending fail. Unemployment spikes. The government is forced to intervene with some kind of relief program, but it's too little too late. The damage is done. We're looking at a recession that could last years, with long-term scarring effects on household balance sheets and the broader economy. Scenario 3, the structural breaking point. This is the darkest scenario, but one we have to consider. The credit card debt crisis becomes so severe that it triggers broader financial instability. Remember, banks have securitized a lot of this credit card debt. They've packaged it into bonds and sold it to investors. If default rates spike high enough, those securities lose value. Investors take losses. Some financial institutions, particularly smaller ones heavily exposed to consumer credit, face serious problems. We could see bank failures. Not on the scale of 2008 necessarily, but enough to create panic and contagion. In this scenario, credit markets freeze. Not just credit cards. All forms of consumer credit. Auto loans. Mortgages. Small business loans. The financial system seizes up because nobody trusts the underlying debt anymore. The Federal Reserve is forced into emergency intervention mode. Bailouts. Liquidity programs. The whole crisis management playbook. Meanwhile, ordinary Americans are devastated. Millions in default. Credit destroyed. Years of financial hardship ahead. And the social and political consequences are severe. People lose faith in the system. Populist anger explodes. The political landscape shifts dramatically. This scenario is the nightmare version. But it's not impossible if current trends continue unchecked. So where does that leave us right now? We're sitting on a $1.2 trillion credit card debt bomb with the fuse already lit. Delinquencies are rising. Interest rates are at crushing levels. Consumer spending is showing cracks. And there's no clear path to defusing this before it explodes. The Federal Reserve could cut interest rates, but that takes time and credit card companies won't pass on the full benefit. The government could intervene with debt relief programs, but there's no political will for that. Most politicians won't touch it because it's easier to blame individuals for poor financial decisions than to acknowledge the structural problems that created this crisis. Banks could voluntarily lower rates or work with struggling borrowers, but why would they? They're making record profits. The current system works great for them. It's only devastating for everyone else. So realistically, this crisis is going to get worse before it gets better. More people will fall behind. More will default. Consumer spending will weaken. And the economic consequences will spread. The question is whether we experience a manageable downturn or a catastrophic collapse. And that depends on factors largely outside of individual control. How much more debt can the system absorb before it breaks? How long can consumers keep spending on credit they can't afford to repay? How patient will creditors be before they trigger a crisis by cutting off access too quickly? But here's what you can do right now to protect yourself. If you're carrying credit card debt, you need to treat this as a financial emergency. Stop adding to it if at all possible. Attack the highest interest debt first. Look for balance transfer offers that give you 0% for a promotional period and use that time to pay down principal aggressively. Consider debt consolidation if you can get a lower rate through a personal loan. Talk to a nonprofit credit counselor. Not a for-profit debt settlement company that will wreck your credit. A legitimate nonprofit that can help you create a plan. If you're struggling to make payments, contact your credit card company before you miss a payment. Sometimes they'll work with you on a hardship plan that temporarily lowers your rate or payment. It's not guaranteed, but it's worth trying. And most importantly, start building an emergency fund even if it's tiny. Even $500 or $1,000 in savings can prevent you from having to put the next emergency on a credit card at 27% interest. I know that's hard when you're already stretched thin, but it's essential, because the next crisis is coming and you need a buffer. For those who aren't in credit card debt, count yourself fortunate and stay vigilant. Don't get complacent. Keep your spending below your income. Build savings. Avoid lifestyle inflation. Because the economy is heading into turbulent waters and you want to be as financially stable as possible. And regardless of your personal situation, understand that this is a systemic problem that requires systemic solutions. We need political pressure for change. We need regulations that prevent predatory lending. We need enforcement of existing consumer protection laws. We need a serious conversation about why working people can't afford basic necessities without going into debt. This crisis was created by policy choices. Choices about wages, about healthcare costs, about housing policy, about financial regulation. And it can only be solved by different policy choices. But that requires political will. And political will only comes from public pressure, from people demanding change, from voters making this a priority. So talk about this. Share information. Contact your representatives. Make noise. Because the credit card debt bomb is ticking. And when it explodes, it's going to hurt everyone. Not just the people carrying the debt. The entire economy will suffer. Jobs will be lost. Businesses will fail. Communities will struggle. We're all in this together whether we realize it or not. The credit card debt crisis is a symptom of deeper economic dysfunction, of an economy that doesn't work for working people anymore, of a system rigged to extract wealth from the many and concentrate it in the hands of the few. And until we fix those underlying problems, we're going to keep lurching from crisis to crisis. Credit card debt today, student loans tomorrow, medical debt, housing. It never ends because the structure is broken. We've built an economy that requires people to go into debt just to survive. And that's not sustainable. Eventually, something breaks. We might be approaching that breaking point right now. So here's what I need from you. Drop a comment and tell me your story. Are you dealing with credit card debt? How high are your interest rates? Have you missed payments or struggled to keep up? Your experiences matter. They're evidence that this isn't just statistics. This is real people facing real hardship. And the more we share these stories, the harder it becomes for politicians and banks to pretend everything is fine. If this video opened your eyes to what's happening, hit that like button. Share this with people who need to understand the danger. Your parents, your friends, your coworkers. The more people who understand this crisis, the better chance we have of forcing change before it's too late. And subscribe to Emily Carter because I'm going to keep tracking this story. As the crisis develops, as the numbers get worse, as the economic consequences unfold, I'll be here breaking it down and demanding accountability. The credit card debt bomb is real. It's ticking. and time is running out. What happens next depends on whether we face this crisis honestly or keep pretending everything is fine until the explosion destroys us. Thanks for watching. I'm Emily Carter. Stay informed, stay vigilant, and demand an economy that works for everyone, not just the banks. I'll see you in the next one.